Imagine feeling pain so intense it seems to pierce your skin. But when you look, there are no wounds, no blood, nothing visible to the human eye. How would you react? Would you flee in fear, or would you believe something greater was happening? This was the reality of a simple young man named Francesco Forgione, whom the world would later know as Padre Pio. Long before becoming known as the stigmatized friar, he was already experiencing mysterious experiences that few would dare believe. In his youth, while other boys dreamed of an ordinary life, Pio endured sleepless nights, inexplicable visions, and invisible pains that no one understood. They were silent signs, small fragments of a destiny being shaped by something far beyond human comprehension. Have you ever stopped to think that some of the pain we carry could be signs of something greater? Padre Pio wondered exactly that, little imagining that he was about to become one of the most enigmatic and inspiring figures in the Catholic faith. This story isn't just about suffering, but also about mystery, courage, and faith, an invisible sign that would change not only his life, but also the lives of thousands of people who would seek hope and miracles from him. Throughout this video, you'll discover how it all began, what Padre Pio really felt, and why those first invisible wounds were so important to his destiny. So, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and get ready to dive into this fascinating journey, the story of Padre Pio's first invisible wounds. Have you ever heard of pains no one can see, but which completely change a person's life? Sounds like something out of a movie, doesn't it? But it really happened. And the protagonist of this story was a simple young man from a small Italian town who would later become known as Padre Pio. Even as a boy, Francesco Forgione, that was his baptismal name, already had something different in his eyes. There was a blend of innocence and depth in him that caught everyone's attention. But what no one knew was that he was about to experience experiences that would challenge even the wisest and put him on an unexpected path. At that time, his life was humble and peaceful, made up of prayers, work, and small daily gestures. But suddenly something began to change. Francesco began to feel strange, intense pains that seemed to pierce his body like open wounds. But when he looked at his hands, his feet, or his side, there was nothing there. No cuts, no scratches, no physical signs that could justify his suffering. It was as if an invisible pain had chosen to dwell within him. And here arises the first great question that grips everyone. How can someone feel so much without any visible evidence? These pains were unusual, and Francesco knew it. What he didn't yet understand was that this would be just the beginning of a long journey marked by mystery and faith. Neighbors, friends, and even some religious figures found his silent posture, his deep concentration in prayer, and the way he seemed to carry an invisible burden strange. And it was at this point that curiosity grew. Were these pains coming from something spiritual, a divine sign, or were they just a figment of his imagination? And now I ask you, if you were in Francesco's shoes, what would you do? Would you try to ignore this pain? Would you rush to tell everyone? Or would you keep it quiet, as he did, hoping for a greater meaning? Brace yourself, because this is just the first page of a story that would change everything. From a very early age, Francesco, who would later become Padre Pio, felt that his life was not like that of other children. While his classmates ran through the streets, played, or dreamed of ordinary futures, he found himself surrounded by experiences that no one around him could explain. As a boy, he had dreams so vivid they seemed real. Sometimes he would wake up frightened by visions of angels, saints, or even shadowy figures trying to frighten him. He didn't tell anyone about this, for fear they would laugh or think he was making it up. But deep inside him, something told him it wasn't imagination, it was a silent calling. These experiences intensified over time. During prayers, he felt a peace so profound that it seemed he was leaving the physical world. At other times, he felt his heart race as if someone invisible were there watching him. It was strange and comforting at the same time. This contrast made Francesco wonder, was he experiencing a blessing or a trial? The most striking thing is that even as a child, he didn't shy away from these feelings. On the contrary, he accepted every detail as if it were part of a plan he didn't yet understand. It was as if he were being prepared for something much greater, even without knowing what his mission would be. To those on the outside, he saw only a simple boy from a humble village, but inside, a story pulsated that would forever change the lives of many. It was an ordinary afternoon when something completely out of the ordinary happened to Francesco. He was praying silently as he always did, when suddenly he felt a sharp pain piercing his hands. It was as if an invisible nail had pierced his skin. Startled, he quickly glanced at his palms, expecting to see blood or a cut. But there was nothing, no scratches, no visible marks, just the pain that throbbed like a fire burning inside him. In the following days, the sensation recurred, sometimes in his hands, sometimes in his feet, and even in the side of his chest, as if struck by an invisible spear. The intensity was so great that he could barely sleep or concentrate on simple tasks. But the most remarkable thing was that, on the outside, his body remained intact. Anyone who saw him would swear he was healthy, but inside, the reality was different. Francesco suffered silently from wounds no one could see. He kept this secret close to his heart, without telling anyone. He feared being misunderstood, and called sick, or even accused of making things up. Only a few close religious figures knew about his pain, and even they didn't know how to explain it. After all, how could anyone justify feeling wounds that didn't exist? For Francesco, it wasn't just physical pain. It was also spiritual confusion. Why was he, so young, going through this? What sense was there in carrying an invisible suffering that kept him from normalcy? Each new crisis was accompanied by deeper prayers. He sought answers from God, trying to understand if it was a punishment, a trial, or a calling. And here arises the mystery that intrigues to this day. These pains were not just a detail in Padre Pio's life. They were the beginning of a journey that would change everything. Who would have thought that those invisible wounds would be the prelude to something that would mark the history of faith? Francesco, still very young, understood that something extraordinary was happening inside him, but it wasn't easy to carry. This burden in silence. How could he tell others that he felt excruciating pain in his hands, feet, and chest without a single drop of blood or visible mark? He knew that if he revealed everything openly, many would laugh, doubt, or even call him crazy. So he decided to keep it a secret, speaking only to people he truly trusted. Among these few were his confessors and spiritual superiors. To his closest priests, he reported the strange pains and visions that accompanied him in prayer. But even they, experienced in religious life, remained silent in the face of so much uncertainty. Some believed it could be a trial sent by God. Others suspected it was a spiritual temptation. After all, the line between the divine and the deceptive has always seemed very thin when it comes to mystical experiences. Francesco, however, didn't seek human explanations. What he wanted was to understand God's will in the midst of that invisible suffering. Each time he felt pain coursing through his body, he turned to deep prayer, asking for the strength to endure. What was most impressive was his attitude. Instead of complaining or running away, he accepted the experience as part of a calling that deep down he sensed but didn't yet understand. This closely guarded secret shaped his way of life. Francesco became increasingly silent, reserved, immersed in long, intense prayers. Those who knew him sensed something was different, but couldn't explain it. It was as if he carried within himself an invisible battle that only he and God knew. And here arises the big question: to what extent can someone hide such a profound truth? How long would those pains remain invisible only to human eyes? Francesco's secret was about to reach proportions he could never have imagined. and the world would soon discover that his life would be forever marked by signs no one could deny. The pains continued, appearing suddenly, as if to remind him that they weren't just a figment of his imagination. Francesco could be praying, walking around the convent, or simply in silence, and suddenly he would be overcome by a sensation so strong he could barely concentrate. In those moments, a single question hammered at his mind: why me? It was impossible not to question himself. He was just a simple young man from a small town, with no wealth, no titles, and no prominence. Why would God choose him to carry something so mysterious and painful? There were days when he felt unworthy, too small to bear such a great burden. On others, he wondered if it might just be a trial to test his faith. This constant doubt wasn't just physical, but spiritual. Each pain brought with it an emotional weight that seemed to crush his heart. Was he being deceived? Were these pains traps of the enemy to confuse him? Or, on the contrary, were they signs of a divine calling so profound that he wasn't yet ready to understand? Francesco prayed more than ever. He spent hours in silence before the crucifix, asking for answers. His face was marked by suffering, his eyes closed, his heart restless. Often he didn't receive clear answers, but he felt a mysterious peace, as if God were saying, "Trust, time will reveal." This uncertainty, however, never made him give up. On the contrary, it strengthened his faith. It was as if each invisible pain was also a reminder that his life was no longer his own. It was being guided by something greater. And herein lies the key to understanding his journey. Even without understanding, Francesco didn't shy away from the question that echoed within him. He transformed it into prayer, into surrender, into trust. But little did he know that the answer would come in an even more surprising way, in visions that would forever change the course of his life. It was on one of these nights of intense prayer that something extraordinary happened to Francesco. He was kneeling before the crucifix, exhausted after another day of invisible pain and unanswered questions. The silence of the convent was profound, broken only by the sound of his heavy breathing, and it was there in the darkness that an unexpected vision took hold of his eyes and his soul. Suddenly, he clearly saw the figure of Christ crucified. It wasn't a memory or an imagined image. It was so real that Francesco felt his heart race. Christ stood before him, covered in blood, with nails piercing his hands and feet, and his side pierced by the spear. But what struck him most were not the visible wounds, but the look in his eyes. A deep look, full of pain, but also of love. A look that seemed to pierce the soul and speak without words. In that moment, Francesco understood that the pain he had been carrying was not his alone. It was a mystical reflection of the passion of Christ. It was as if he had been called to participate in some mysterious way in Jesus' redemptive suffering. This revelation brought not only astonishment, but also tears. He wept like a child, not out of fear, but out of understanding. The vision was fleeting, but it left lasting scars. For the first time, Francesco realized that his suffering had a greater meaning. It was not punishment, nor illusion, nor a trap. It was a divine invitation to unite with Christ in a way few in the world would ever experience. When the vision ended, silence returned to the room. But Francesco was no longer the same. His heart burned with a new certainty. Those invisible wounds were indeed a sign that would forever change his life, his mission, and the faith of thousands of people around the world. After that intense vision of the crucified Christ, Francesco felt as if he had received a direct answer from God. For the first time, he understood that his invisible pains had meaning. They were a reflection of Jesus' passion. This revelation brought relief, but also something that perhaps few can imagine: fear. Yes, because along with the certainty of a calling also came the doubt. Would he be strong enough to carry it through to the end? On the one hand, there was a new light within him. He felt chosen, loved in a unique way, as if God had given him a special mission. This feeling filled him with the courage to continue praying, serving, and enduring pain without complaint. It was as if he had found a purpose greater than any human explanation. But on the other hand, shadows of doubt constantly haunted him. What if it was all just an illusion? What if he was being deceived by the enemy, who could use even faith to confuse? These questions constantly haunted him, especially on nights of greatest suffering. Francesco didn't want to fall into the trap of believing in something that didn't come from God. This mixture of light and uncertainty made him even more profound. Instead of abandoning his faith, he clung even more tightly to prayer, asking for discernment and strength. Every tear he shed before the crucifix was a silent plea. Lord, don't let me err. Don't let me deceive myself. Those who knew him noticed this transformation, his more serious demeanor, his distant gaze at times, his long hours of silence. It was as if he lived on a fine line between heaven and earth, experiencing both the sweetness of faith and the weight of responsibility. And it is in this contrast that the greatness of his story lies. Francesco discovered that being called by God didn't mean living only in the light. It also meant facing doubts, fears, and temptations, but without giving up. Because deep down, he knew something even greater was coming. Francesco's pain continued, silent and invisible. To many, nothing seemed different about him. His body showed no cuts, no blood, no outward signs of the suffering he carried within. But even without seeing the wounds, some people close to him began to notice something strange. The monks of the convent, who lived side by side with him, noticed small changes in his daily behavior. During group prayers, there were moments when Francesco would remain motionless, as if in a trance. His face would suddenly change, taking on an expression of profound pain, his eyes half closed, his breathing labored, as if struggling against something invisible. It was impossible not to notice. Some brothers tried to get closer, but they soon realized it wasn't something physical they could alleviate. It was a spiritual burden, something that couldn't be cured with medicine or rest. Witnesses reported that at times, Francesco seemed to carry an invisible cross on his shoulders. His body would bend, his hands would tremble, and yet he remained steadfast, praying silently. There were also those who said that when looking into his eyes during these crises, one could sense something mysterious, almost supernatural. It wasn't just human suffering, but a reflection of something much greater, as if his pain was shared by all who observed him. These perceptions generated two types of reactions. Some believed they were witnessing a divine calling, a real sign from God manifesting himself in Francesco. Others, however, doubted and thought it was all just exaggeration or imagination. But the truth is, no one was indifferent. Everyone who witnessed these moments left touched in some way. It was the beginning of what years later would become impossible to hide. The invisible pain was already leaving its mark, not on Francesco's body, but in the hearts of those who witnessed it. The mystery was growing, and soon the secret would no longer be his alone. If the invisible pain was already a heavy burden to bear, there was something even more frightening that Francesco faced in silence: spiritual attacks. He himself reported that many nights he was awakened by strange noises, threatening voices, and presences surrounding him in his room. These were no ordinary dreams or figments of imagination. They were experiences so intense that they left scars on his mind and heart. Francesco said the enemy tried every way to divert him from his path. Sometimes he felt blows, shoves, and even his body being thrown against the wall. Other times, he saw hideous figures, deformed shadows that laughed at him, trying to convince him that everything he experienced was a farce. These moments were moments of pure terror, but instead of giving in to fear, he clung to prayer. Many testimonies confirm that the screams and noises were heard by other friars, who were shocked by the intensity of the spiritual struggles taking place there. When they entered the room, they found Francesco exhausted, but on his knees, murmuring prayers and holding his rosary. It was as if each attack was also a test of endurance and faith. The enemy seemed to know that these invisible pains had a greater purpose, and so he did everything he could to make him give up. But even in the face of attacks and frightening visions, Francesco remained steadfast. He believed that if Christ had suffered, he too should bear his share with courage. These battles weren't just physical or emotional, they were spiritual, and they revealed to the world something even deeper. Francesco's life was at the center of a struggle between light and darkness, and the more they tried to bring him down, the stronger his faith grew. Faced with so many mysterious experiences, invisible pains, visions of Christ, and even demonic attacks, it was natural that criticism and doubts arose. Some people who knew Francesco sincerely believed he was experiencing something divine. Others, however, were suspicious, thinking it was all just an exaggeration, a figment of his imagination, or even a mental health issue. After all, how could one believe in wounds no one could see? Many, if they were in his shoes, would try to explain themselves, justify every detail, prove they weren't lying. But Francesco chose a different path: silence. Instead of wasting words trying to convince, he immersed himself in ever-deepening prayers. He spent hours before the tabernacle, seeking in God the strength he couldn't find in human judgments. This silence wasn't weakness, but a form of resistance. Francesco understood that the answers people sought lay not in speeches or explanations, but in the signs that time itself would reveal. It was as if he were saying without words, "It's not me who must prove anything, it's God who will show what needs to be seen." And indeed, his behavior aroused curiosity. Those who criticized him were surprised by his humility, his calm, and the way he didn't react to provocations. Those who believed in him were further strengthened by seeing his silent dedication without vanity or desire for recognition. This silence was also a shield. By not defending himself, Francesco protected himself from vanity and the temptation to be exalted by men. He didn't want fame, he didn't want the spotlight, he didn't want to be treated as special. All he wanted was to remain faithful to the mission he was slowly beginning to understand. And so, while the world was divided between belief and doubt, he remained steadfast in his silence. Little did anyone know that this same silence would be broken years later by something impossible to deny: visible, bleeding wounds that would usher in a new phase of his life. The year was 1918, and Francesco had long lived in silence, enduring invisible pain that no one could understand. But in a moment of deep prayer, something happened that would change his life forever. As he meditated before the crucifix, immersed in contemplation of the Passion of Christ, an intense light filled the room. He described feeling as if rays of fire pierced his hands, feet, and the side of his chest. The pain was so intense, it nearly made him faint. When he opened his eyes, he realized something had changed. The wounds that had previously been invisible were now there, real, open, bleeding. His hands bore the marks of nails, his feet were wounded, and his side bore a deep gash. Exactly where Christ had been pierced by the spear. It was the phenomenon of stigma. For the first time, visible signs confirmed what for years he had kept hidden only in silence and prayer. It was no longer just a spiritual pain he felt, but also a physical mark that everyone could see. The news spread quickly. Brothers of the convent were shocked. Doctors were called to examine the wounds, and the faithful began to make pilgrimages to him. Some believed immediately, seeing the wounds as an indisputable divine sign. Others doubted, accusing him of malingering or even self-harm, but no one could remain indifferent to what was happening. Padre Pio, however, maintained the same stance. He neither sought human explanations nor tried to defend himself. He accepted his wounds as part of his mission, even knowing they would attract both faith and persecution. From that day on, the pain that had previously been invisible became concrete proof of something beyond reason. It was the sign that confirmed everything not only for Francesco, but for the entire world. When Padre Pio's wounds became visible, the world around him was never the same. The small community where he lived soon became a pilgrimage site. People from different cities, and even other countries, began traveling to see him. Many came seeking answers, others simply out of curiosity, but all left impressed by what they witnessed. Reports multiplied. Believers said they felt a profound peace when standing before him. Some claimed to have received physical and spiritual healings after his prayers. Others testified to seeing even more extraordinary phenomena, such as the inexplicable perfume that emanated from his wounds, a sweet aroma described by many as heavenly. These signs further increased popular devotion. But at the same time, Padre Pio's wounds sparked suspicion. Doctors were called to examine him, and many were perplexed. Some attempted to offer scientific explanations, while others admitted they couldn't understand the origin of the wounds. The Church, cautious, began rigorous investigations, fearing deception or exaggeration. Some believed him immediately, while others accused him of fraud or mass hysteria. This blend of faith and controversy made Padre Pio even more well-known. Newspapers began reporting on the phenomenon, and his figure went beyond the confines of his small town, reaching the world. For many, he was a living sign of God's presence. For others, a mystery that defied reason and science. In the midst of all this, Padre Pio maintained the same posture as always: silence, prayer, and surrender. He didn't seek fame, he didn't respond to accusations, nor did he gloat over the devotion he received. For him, his wounds were not a source of glory, but a burden to be carried in union with Christ. And it was precisely this humble attitude that touched hearts even more. Because in the face of so much doubt and turmoil, Padre Pio remained steadfast, letting time itself be the judge. The impact of his wounds was not limited to one place or one time. It spread throughout the world, reaching thousands of people who to this day are inspired by his life and testimony. The first invisible pains that marked Francesco's youth were not just strange and isolated episodes. Today, looking back, we can understand that they were the starting point of a mission that would change not only his life, but also the lives of thousands of people around the world. Each silent pain, each hidden tear, each secret prayer paved the way for the phenomenon of stigmata to become impossible to ignore years later. The legacy of these first wounds lies not only in the visible marks that emerged in 1918, but in the message they carried. That true faith is often tested in silence, in what human eyes cannot see. Francesco, who became known as Padre Pio, showed the world that even the most mysterious suffering can gain meaning when experienced in union with something greater. Thousands of believers found inspiration, hope, and courage in his life. Many believe he interceded in miraculous cures. Others were touched by his ability to understand people's suffering even before they spoke. And even today, decades after his death, millions continue to look to Padre Pio for an example of unwavering faith. Those first invisible wounds were more than a mystery. They were the sign that confirmed a mission. They paved the way for Padre Pio to become not only a respected priest, but one of the most remembered and venerated saints in the Catholic Church. And now I ask you, do you believe these pains were simply inexplicable human experiences or divine signs meant to strengthen the world's faith? Leave your opinion in the comments, because your perspective can further enrich this reflection. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for upcoming stories that will reveal surprising details about the life of Padre Pio and other great examples of faith. Your participation is essential for us to continue this journey together.
Hear the true prophetic message.